Dawn of Battle. This is a war game by Worthington Games that covers 20 different battles, so you got a lot of value here. And the battles go from 3,000 years ago all the way to the Middle Ages, so maybe not just dawn, but also mid-morning and maybe even noon of battle. The game is for 2 players mainly, and it is rated pretty low for solitaire play, but I play the game solitaire. That's how I played it. That's how I play most of my war games, and especially these days in times of pandemic. I think the low rating is because of the event cards, but I play Commands and Colors solitaire, and those also have a lot of event cards, so no problem there. With a little bit of imagination, you can play the game solitaire, controlling both sides to the best of your possibilities. Worst come to worst, you can always add some randomization, the old rule of if you would play a card, roll a die, and if you roll a 1, then you don't get to play the card. That rule just adds a little bit of unpredictability that works for me and maybe also works for you. The game comes with a mounted board, which you see here. There's also a counter tray, very nice. And the mounted board is all you got. Although the rulebook does make reference to terrain, there are no terrain tiles. I guess you can make your own, create your own, but it's all about the unit, it's all about the leaders, it's all about the combination of different weapons and other factors. The game is entirely card driven, meaning you will use cards for combat resolution, you even use cards to roll dice, producing those events, those random events down there. And as I said, 20 scenarios, 20 different battles. Where the heck did I put the scenario book? There you go. 20 different battles. And they really cover such different situations, from Assyria versus Damascus to Thebes versus Sparta, Epirus versus Rome, Rome versus Gaul, and then we go all the Romans. We got some Romans, yes, we get to the Vikings, and again we get all the way to Silesius versus the Mongols, and England versus Scotland. As you can see, the background is each battle is very minimal, and some of these battles are not universally games. Some I've never heard of before I played the game, and so the background is very minimal. You're not really likely to learn a ton about the battle from this. And so it just gives you a general sense, a general reference there. What is kind of unusual is when they describe each side and they give you the narrative. It's almost like a role-playing game because it's written in the second person. And that's very unusual. I don't think I've seen that in, I don't know, many, or definitely not in many, maybe not in any other war game. Like, your old friend Pompey's dead, blah, blah, blah. That's just unusual. So, we got a lot of different military units, because from chariots to elephants to different kinds of cavalry to firearms, we got them all. And so I'm just gonna put together some counters kind of semi-randomly there. So we're gonna create a completely non-historical battle. We'll call it the Battle of the Contested Vaccine. For whatever reason that I just made up that battle. So how about that? So here are the lines for that famous battle. So the battles of the vaccine, because they're the name of a river in southern Italy. That's totally true. I did not make up that. Oh, but they should be facing this way. Units are represented by these counters here, double-sided, with different values depending on whether the unit is in good order or has been disrupted. When a unit takes a hit, it goes from good order to disrupted, takes another one, booyah, not good. It gets eliminated. Values that you have here are combat value, movement value, possible bonus against range combat. I'm looking for a chariot because that also shows you the values for combat, for range combat, and of course I can't find the chariot. Where is a chariot when you're looking for one? Life is just unfair that way. Of course I'm looking in the counter, in the tray form. for infantry. Here's the chariots, so you also have range combat value and the range up to which the unit can fire. Now, some units can also fire using range combat during movement, and those are the ones, as you can clearly tell, with the movement value printed in blue. You can tell the difference, right? Because I could not. I thought maybe that was what they meant, but if you really squint your eyes and if you really look carefully, then you see that that 4 is printed in a slightly different color from the black in which other movement values are printed. You're probably just gonna read the rulebook and remember which units have the ability of firing when they move, because other than that, it's just gonna be pretty tough. And then we got leaders, super important. This game really emphasizes the importance of leaders. Leaders have a command value here. You will add together the command value of your leaders that will generate action points that are used for everything in the game, basically. Each turn you also draw a card, and that adds more action points. So even if your command value is 0, you still get some. And so that's how you get action points. Then you have a command range up to which they can activate units, and you have a combat value. At the beginning, of course, you select your scenario, set up accordingly, Then at the beginning of each turn, the leaders that were on the board are removed, and represents the fact that they can run around pretty quickly. You receive action points, you determine initiative, and again you can spend action points to bid for it, try to steal initiative from your opponent. Basically speaking, every time you think, can I do that? Spend an action point. And then you get to place your leaders again. Again, there can be an element, if you're playing against a human opponent, of surprise, because you place them with this side facing the opponent, so they don't know exactly which side is which. But that's okay. I played the game solitaire, and I was still, and the game still worked. And then you have the action cycle, in which players will spend action points alternate activating the leaders, and the leaders in turn activate units within their range. And so, for example, I decide to activate that leader, and the leader will activate units within range. I don't have to. Say, for example, this leader could activate this guy, but I decide to wait a little longer, see what happens, and then this one maybe will activate it. And so I place my lead there. For example, I decide to tap to move there and to move there, and so on and so forth. Again, just very, very fictional here. Pretty simple. Then we're also gonna mark the units that moved with a yellow marker. Again, units that have their combat, their movement value printed in blues, so to speak, can also perform range combat during movement. Then after we have the action cycle. Also as part of the action cycle, which is again when players spend action points activating leaders, you can also during the action cycle spend action points to rally your units, to rally your disrupted units. In which case you will draw a card, and you're trying to draw a die value equal to or lower than your total command rating for that army. The idea is, of course, the more command you have, the better it is, the more chances to rally, and so drawing low in that case is good, is pretty good. Now we get, of course, what everybody wants to know, which is combat or melee. That's the fun stuff. So players, after they alternated activating units for movement, possibly for range, possibly for rally, they can then declare melee. And so, for example, and I alternate declaring melee. So I decide, okay, I'm gonna activate this unit to attack that one. We resolve that, and then my opponent says, now I'm gonna activate that unit to attack that one, which may or may not be a good idea, but that's just the example. The first thing that you need to do is to calculate the adjustment. So you take into account, of course, the strength of the attacker and the strength of the defender, and then you apply several modifiers. The strength of the attacker divided by that of the defender as a ratio, like you have done in many other war games. Here, however, becomes a modifier. So if you're 2 to 1, think of that as a +2. Positive modifiers are good for the attacker and bad for the defender. If you're 3 to 1, think of that as a +3. If you have at least as much as the defender, but not enough to go twice, so there'll be around 1 to 1, that still counts as a +1. Unit time modifier, many games about ancient warfare or medieval warfare have a weapon matrix, and we have two. And of course, this one is a little more laborious because there are just so many different things that you have to take into account. Usually, this combat matrix, this weapon matrix, is a lot easier to read because you have, 5 lines and 5 columns. Yeah, you really have to check what happens if a chariot has to deal with a heavy cataphract, or a battle chariot with elephants or heavy archers, and so on and so forth. So that's another modifier that you take into account. Remember, we go through all these steps to come up with a modifier ultimately. Terrain modifier, no need to worry about this one in this set for the game. Vector, so the direction. If you're attacking from the front, not so much. Again, orientation is important. Units are always facing a corner of a hex. If you attack a flank, you get a +1. If you attack a rear, you get a +2. Leader, there is a leader involved, then we use that modifier. Then there can be markers that can be spent, action cheat exertions, event modifiers. So we have different other things that will play into it, but ultimately we'll get to a reciprocal modifier. Say, for example, for one player will be, for the attacker is +2, then the reciprocal is -2 for the defender. +3 for the attacker, the reciprocal is minus the same number for the defender. And so first the attacker draws a card, we look at the modifier, we resolve that, and then the defender looks at the reciprocal and resolves that. The second column tells you the immediate result. If there's a modifier in the third column, that means that the modifier will be applied to the morale check. And the results are indeed that M means a morale check, D is a simple disruption, capital D is a special disruption, and then we have E, which of course is pretty bad, which is elimination. Oh, by the way, these cards, as I mentioned also on the modifiers, so these cards can also be played for events. You will have a hand of cards, and you can also use these events, which of course will modify a range of different things. This is the general idea. Turn after turn, you go through the cycle of removing the leaders, calculating different things, collecting action points, spending action points for a ton of different things, even actually banking them. Even if you have so many you know what to do, you place them on the turn track. They're out of the game, but they may give you a chance of scoring extra victory points at the end of the game. Inflicting a lot of casualties on the opponent, cause the opponent to panic. They start running in all directions. They get different penalties. And also you score a victory point the first time that they panic, but they also score one if they get you to panic once. So the idea is that you play until the end of the scenario, and then you collect points from a variety of different things. From if you were able to pillage their camp, if you were able to panic them, depending on how much damage you inflict on the opponent, points given to you by the scenarios, again, possible points given to you if you banked a number of action markers during the game. When all is said and done, the player with the most victory points wins the game. Dawn of Battle. I like the system that we get to try here for the first time. I like the implementation in this specific set, maybe a little less, and maybe I'm being too picky about that. But let's start from what I like so much about the system. It's a solid system with a lot of interesting things going on that maybe you've seen in other games. there's a certain family resemblance between this game and other games, and yet at the same time, you feel like these elements have been combined to create a different flow with a different flavor. Maybe some of you will draw comparison with Commands and Colors, maybe because of the large hexes and the blank map mainly, and the presence of cards. But to me, I don't see that. I don't know. I wouldn't see that as a strong connection because the cards were so differently from the way they do in Commands and Colors. Lost Battles is a game that seems a lot more similar to me when it comes to how crucial leaders are, morale and panic. Those elements to me make this game feel closer to Lost Battles with hexagons than say Commands and Colors. And then I played other games by Worthington, some of their old Napoleonic games where you have a variable number of action points that could be used for different things, and I see a resemblance with that. But again, all of these, whether they are sources or just they happen to have similarities, they in truth then they emphasize how different this game is. Because yes, you have the importance of leader, the importance of morale and panic, which of course seems to comport with the historical sources, with the events that are being represented in the game. But you have a lot of interesting and tough decisions. Well, precisely because of that, because really those units without leaders, they're not going to do much. But that means that committing the leaders to move these units also exposes the leader to danger. And right there you have this compact with the devil. Darn if you do, darn if you don't. The various abilities, the range of things that you can do between range and charge, and how these units were so different from one another. I like those things very, very much. And I like the fact that the scenarios are somewhat small. They're not like huge epic battles. Because with a selection of Connor that is so large, because it covers everything from chariots, elephants, gunpowder, then setting up a large battle will be a mega pain in the neck, and so you can set them up quite quickly. But that also means that sometimes after the first couple of rounds, when units are committed and some major damage is inflicted, then you can see how the battle starts. The wave of battle goes in one direction, and it may be hard to get it back in the other direction. But again, that also works historically. That also gives me a sense. Some battles in ancient times were very sophisticated, and why should they be? That their point was not to make a puzzle, but to obtain a certain effect in the battlefield. And so again, I like the fact that you have a study of a battle that you can play with some turns of intense maneuvering maybe, then some mighty clashes, and then you have to deal with the aftermath. And again, sometimes it may feel a bit like a foregone conclusion, but there's still interesting elements going on. Your people will raid their camps, but because of that, they're busy looting and they cannot fight. That sort of thing. So you have an interesting, I would say, architecture in the scenarios that you can see a general family resemblance from scenario to scenario. Now, what is it? So the game system to me is fine. Some of the things maybe they do feel a bit fiddly from time to time. I wouldn't mind if the combat resolution was maybe a little bit. Streamlined just a tiny bit, not a big problem. After a while, it's second nature. Okay, that's the direction, that's the flank, those are the other effects. So the modifiers. I know the reciprocal thing maybe is not my favorite thing in the game, but doesn't bother me because then you still ultimately you get that good ancient warfare stuff with either damage or with morale checks. The point is that I like variety, but also I like games that have a certain framework, a certain perspective, a certain stronger identity. Dawn of Battle that goes from the actual Dawn of Battle to almost the day before yesterday, at least in historical terms, at least for Europeans. We don't think that 100 years ago was a long time ago, and we don't think that 500 years ago was that long ago. And here we get to the Middle Ages. So because of this, you have a very large, again, number of units, which makes the weapon matrix a lot more cumbersome. I believe that if you have a set based on these rules that has to do with a certain period in history, just a couple of centuries. So this one is about the ancient Roman Empire. This one is about the late Roman Empire. This is about the early Middle Ages. Then you have fewer weapons. Matrix is a lot more readable. Scenarios are easy to set up. And there's just more flavor, more personality. And especially for a game in which you're introducing a fairly obscure battle, at least for me, and you're introducing it with just 2 sentences. You are the commander and your brother wronged you. Oh, you are the commander and you're a little bit worried about this or that. And then you have 3 lines on the other page telling you this scenario. Then it doesn't really feel to me like a game that is about, oh my gosh, I'm really there. It doesn't feel that connected to history. I need a lot more of that paratext there to really get me excited about seeing those pieces as those forces in the battlefield, as opposed to ultimately blue versus red. I have that blue versus red feeling for some of the scenarios. And so I think the game could have had a whole different approach, could have been a lot more immersive if we went one of 2 ways, really. Either narrowing down the scope and those 20 scenarios about a specific time and place or a specific style of warfare, like Commands and Colors does. Or, at the very least, if each of these scenarios had a lot more text around to really help us get in the feeling, get in the mood. But then again, I don't know that I want to read a 15-page essay before each scenario. I would still prefer if there is a long essay before a collection of scenarios that again have something in common historically, geographically, and then I read that 1-page scenario for each. So to me, the variety on one hand, on paper, looks great. And on the other hand, is precisely the implementation of the variety here that makes the game feel a little bit generic, a little bit abstract. So I think we have a pretty solid system here, and I hope that we're going to have more games that have a more specific emphasis on specific periods. Or frankly, what we're going to need now is just more scenarios, more scenario books. These components could be used for other scenarios, and now we have 10 scenarios that have to do with a specific period of Roman history, 10-page essay about that, 1-page introduction to each scenario. Then wow, then that's the kind of historical gaming that I prefer. Because if it's a game about generic fighting, then I may just go for fantasy or sci-fi. If I want to play games about history, which I do, then I want to have more of a feel for the event. So Dawn of Battle, I think it's a solid new system. I'm happy that we have it, and I think it has potential, and it has a lot of potential that has not been fully explored in this initial set.